There's a couple of iPhone apps. There's one called, oh, I can't think of it, but you're supposed to kind of guess the, it's almost like a, what's the one where you pick the letters in the word and try and fill in the word, and you're supposed to fill in the headline, and you know, it's against time and stuff, and then when you get the headline, it links you to that actual news story. And it was not done by a news organization. It was, you know, done as an app by some entrepreneur. But I think that's an interesting way to expose people to news that they wouldn't necessarily, you know, seek out.
That would totally work on my game of
Yeah.
I would love that.
Yeah. There are a few questions here that
Guess the news, it's called.
have to do with sort of the implications for all of this social media networking on both the physical environment and on public policy. So could you address one or both of those?
Seems like you.
Yeah, just trying to narrow it down.
Yeah,
I mean,
those are big questions,
yeah.
I know, so do your best.
I think there are a lot of fascinating examples. There's a project out of the University of Washington called Urban Sim, which I suspect a lot of people would be interested in. And it's an open source urban planning simulation, so you can, you know, say what will traffic be like in Seattle in 20 years under these assumptions. But basically, it's being designed to allow stakeholders with different levels of expertise to create their own scenarios. And so if you're talking about, you know, expanding the highway system in this particular way, you know, the environmental groups can come along and they can work out some scenarios and try some assumptions, and the smart growth people can come and do their things, and people can use this kind of information as just for a debate and deliberative discussion. And so I think that's something really interesting. I think one of the links between, so all the Smarter Planet stuff that IBM and other companies are doing, where you're taking sensor data and piping it into these, you know, analytical models to get stuff out of it, there's a lot of interest in using those for sort of quote unquote serious purposes, but you could also use those to drive simulation games. And I think it would be really cool if, for example, you could get teams of students in high schools playing games against the water department to figure out the most efficient way to manage water in the city or something.
Yeah. Well, that actually relates to a couple questions here relating to the connection of gaming to actual participation in real-world phenomenon. The one says, what about connecting real-world devices like home thermostats to online social games so that participation competition could change actual behavior?
Right, which is happening. Do you know the Lost Jewels project? This is my favorite example of a smart meter game. It's a startup right now. They're not live yet, but I just think it's brilliant. So it's a game called Lost Jewels. It's basically a game world, very much like Farmville type social media game. And the way that you earn virtual currency to spend in the game world is by making bets in a kind of prediction market on other people's energy use in the real world. So this is great. So if I say to you, would you please try to cut your energy by 10% this weekend? You'd be like, well, whatever, maybe. But if I told you, hey, I bet $10 on you in Lost Jewels that you can cut your energy by 10%, you might feel awesome and want to do it. And then when I tell you that I bet $10 against your ability to do it, then you might be really motivated to do it. And so it's basically a stock market, prediction market exchange where all of the betting is on people's ability to reduce real-world energy usage hooked up to their smart meters or to achieve different goals. Could easily see that expanded to health goals around heart rate things and pedometers and air sensor. I mean, there's all kinds of connecting that sort of stuff. Cars.
Yeah, and to turn that around, this is another concept proposal by a fellow, I can't recall his name, at Emerson College in Boston. It's called Neighborhood of Tomorrow. You can, I think, if you Google notgame.org, you can find it. But he's sketched out a game where you have teams, you play it online for points, but the way you get your points is by taking actions in the real world. And so it's kind of an online game plus meetups, maybe plus geocaching or something.
Right. And even in Evoke, every week there's a real world mission. So our episode this week is about off-grid energy. And so if you want to get points for the ACT mission this week, you have to convert the power source for something you use every day to an off-grid sustainable power source. So for example, somebody's converting a soccer ball to use the kinetic energy to power a light to study by from kicking around the ball. And the way you report back with blogs and videos and photographs. So definitely this idea that there are real-world missions that we report back using social media is a key part of this game space.
Yeah, there are a couple questions that are sort of reflecting on what the three of you have talked about, and then thinking about the and the idea of cooperation, participation in this online world, and then the sort of paralysis in Washington, D.C., and the fact that, you know, the Senate can't move anything through. I mean, this kind of contrast between cooperation in one part of the world and a total lack of cooperation in sort of the quote-unquote real world. Any thoughts? Are these two things connected, or is there any way to translate the participatory collaborative work that you're all doing into something that, that might change things in Washington?
Well, the game is designed wrong in Washington. There's no collective stakes, right? In an online game, if you just prevent other people from succeeding, it doesn't actually advance your cause.
Exactly.
The Senate could learn from
right.
it.
And I mean, there's a lot of the research I do, it's not so much about actually making everything into a real game. It's about learning about the reward systems, the design mechanics. You can sort of abstract out principles. But it would be great to reimagine democracy. And what does it mean to represent people, and what are the mechanics of government? We might not be able to do it in the US, but there are lots of countries that are doing radical experiments with democratic participation, and we might see kind of innovation and prototyping happening in other parts of the world. New constitutional convention maybe in the next 100 years.
Yeah, as a big game. Yeah, fascinating. Are there any other questions that didn't get on cards that anyone wants to ask? Yes, here.
I'm sure we just got a snapshot of your respective research, but I'm interested in hearing from you guys regarding, with the mobile phone began in 2008, more users accessing the internet via mobile phone and slipping in Africa versus traditional mechanisms. I think we heard mostly about today. What's the challenges and the opportunities associated with gaming and social networking with devices like this?
Well, I'll start on that one. Part of my group is working on what we call the next billion space, which is, exactly has to do with the rise of mobile phones as a platform in, much of what we call the developing world. And one of the very interesting challenges there is, especially if you look, for example, at rural India or Africa, is you have either a lot of cases where people are non-literate, or in the case of rural India, there are lots of dialects and languages that are spoken and not mutually understood. And so, first of all, how do you deal with the linguistic diversity? And secondly, ignoring that, how much can we do by speech alone, when you don't have a generally accessible written alphabet? And speech has always been a really hard thing. It's always been 10 years off. Now I think maybe it's 5 years off. I do think we're getting better, but I think that's a big challenge.
And it's a challenge we definitely faced with the VOC. Obviously, a game aimed at sub-Saharan Africa has to be optimized for mobile phones. So you can play it on the web, and most players in North America are playing it on the web, but it's optimized for the Opera Mini browser. There's an SMS feature that sends you your missions, and you can report back text and videos and photos just from your phone. So a lot of our players there are just playing it entirely on mobile phone. And from a design perspective, the constraints we've had to keep in mind are, as opposed to traditional video games where they kind of want you to be in a spell in front of the screen for a really long time, we have to design more micro interactions. So the game design here is designed for us to push a mission at you, and you kind of go away and think about how you want to do it, and then come back when you're ready. So it's not a kind of continuous, it's more like how we use mobile phones, in and out, in and out. Yeah, snacking, exactly. And also thinking about You know, the role of text and audio in games, which is since the 80s been woefully underutilized. And so there's a possibility while we wait for sort of systems like Zebo to be more ubiquitous that we'll see what they call kind of low fidelity games making a comeback, which is something that at the annual Game Developers Conference a couple weeks ago was a big topic of interest. The design constraints around that kind of thing.
Great. I think there's a hand there. Go ahead.
Have you heard of like gaming technology being used to sell products? Because at the company I work for, we have a gaming technology called Putty that's used to basically design these emotional walls that we sell. And it's called Ice because it melts into other types of technology. And it's just one area of gaming that.
Very cool. So it's kind of like a 3D virtual sim. Very cool.
Yeah, we sit down either with architects or end users and we in real time lay out the space and take either an AutoCAD or a plan and come out with nice program out with this, and then you can basically design the whole system and it simultaneously creates like a part list and that's how we order product.
Now I bet that's. It might be worth pushing a little bit on this idea of games a little bit further. So in my mind, for that to be, that's more an example of game technology and game usability being used. So when you asked if I've heard of a game being used to actually sell stuff, you know, for that to be more than just game usability or game technology, which in itself seems to work very well, you know, you'd have to ask yourself, do we want to put constraints on the kinds of walls that they can build? Do they get points for designing more or building more? I mean, if you were to push the game design idea, you'd have to go in that direction, and it might turn out to be a similar example with the news space where, no, people don't really, it's not a good idea to go full game, but more about game usability or game like feedback systems.
Yeah, I think using game systems is being experimented with a lot, and I know at the transportation studies here at the U, they have students that are designing road systems, doing it with a computer program, like they have to go around certain mountains and topographies, and then they put the design into a race car driving game engine, and the student then has to drive the road that they just did, and you realize you've got a hair turn curve. That's not going to really work. So I think, but it's not a game. I mean, it's not like how fast can you get to the end point. So I think there's really interesting physics engines and things like that are used in making games, but it doesn't necessarily make it be a game.
Right. So it's a spectrum. We need to become more literate about talking about what we mean. Whether, and it would be cool. I don't think anybody's done this, but to have a list of, this is game reward systems like Foursquare. Game usability, game,
Yeah, the are you familiar with DIGRA, the digital? Yeah. DIGRA's they were trying to create a taxonomy, essentially, of games.
Cool. Digital Games Research Association.
Yeah. I was going to say, I mean, but avergaming obviously is a huge field. Again, the effectiveness of it is something that I don't know has been really, very well tested.